The baseball world has been rocked. George Steinbrenner, the longtime owner of the New York Yankees, has died after a massive heart attack. This statement just in from the Yankees. They say he was a visionary and a giant in the world of sports. He took a great but struggling franchise and turned it into a champion again. I'm joined now on the phone by filmmaker Ken Burns. It's good to see you. Thanks very much. I think a lot of times when you see statements at a time like this, they can be a little hyperbolic, but calling Steinbrenner a visionary and a giant in the world of sports is no exaggeration, is it?
Not at all. His influence in the game of baseball has been central, and obviously we extend our deepest condolences to the family, but this is really the passing of an age. This is an utterly American character. We've seen his type stride across our stage in many of our eras, but the last 30, 40 years of baseball can be in some ways considered a Steinbrenner era. This is an American born on the 4th of July who is really almost better suited to running a football team than a baseball team, where it is much more about loss, and a man who never tolerated loss, and for years and decades ushered in this period of both turmoil and winning that have left not only the rest of the baseball world, but also Yankee fans sort of divided on that strategy. But nonetheless, he made colorful news every moment of every day, and brought the Yankees back to being the most successful franchise in all of baseball history.
I want to talk in a minute about the Yankees and baseball and what he did to that franchise. But tell me a little bit about George Steinbrenner, the man. He was often criticized for his meddlesome style. There were people who said in recent years that he had become much more mellow. Who was the George Steinbrenner that you knew?
Well, I didn't know him personally, but I think the Steinbrenner that all of us were used to was the autocratic leader of the Yankees, who was willing at a moment's notice to reverse course and fire a manager, as he did, more than 20 times in 22 years, quite often that person being the volatile Billy Martin, this man who was restless and had that kind of football mentality of needing to win every single game, when baseball teaches you those lessons of losses every single day, but nonetheless was able to, at different eras, first in the late 70s, right after he bought the franchise in the early 70s, and then, of course, with this amazing stroke of luck with the hiring of Joe Torre in the mid-90s, ushering in this amazing dynasty that is with us to this day. And
in fact, Ken, the Yankees became the first franchise to be valued at $1 billion. That's, I think, a 10,000% return on his original investment. When he bought that team from CBS, he just paid a few $1 million for it, and he has really rode that franchise to the most extraordinary financial success in all of sports. Ken, if you could stay, I want to also bring in our NBC correspondent, Mike Taibbi, who's probably sat through a few Yankees games in his day. I
have to tell you, Chris, I went to my first Yankees World Series back in the late 50s, early 60s, so I've been watching Yankee games for a long time.
And watching George Steinbrenner for a long time. What are your thoughts about him?
Well, he was a larger-than-life figure. I think Ken was just talking about that. And the word that Ken used, that he strode across the stage, is exactly true. This was not somebody who just had the money, Mr. Moneybags, and assembled the best team that money could buy. He really got involved, so much so that he opened himself up for more criticism than any owner in his era, and yet, as Ken said, and everybody acknowledges, he was the most successful. 7 World Series, 11 pennants in the first 23 years of his stewardship, and then when his sons took over in 2007, they continued the winning tradition, and as you know, they're the current and defending world champions again this year, another George Steinbrenner team.
When you see baseball fans across the country, whether they're 5 years old or 95 years old, there doesn't seem to be a lot of in between. You either love or you hate the Yankees.
He was out there.
Yeah, how much of that do you attribute to George Steinbrenner?
I think a lot of it is that. A lot of it is New York as well. And he was almost, even though he was not a New Yorker at all, he had a shipbuilding company elsewhere. Came from Ohio and all that. That's right.
Rocky River.
He became identified with this city, this big, brassy, noisy, boastful city. A guy who was so arrogant in a way that he apologized when the Yankees lost the World Series once, and got a lot of criticism for that outside of New York City. But he once said, too, that after breathing, winning is the most important thing. Breathing first and then winning.
One of the things that we don't talk a lot about, or we haven't over the years, Ken, that I think is worth acknowledging right now, is that he was also a great philanthropist. He was involved in a lot of charitable organizations, gave his heart as well as his money. But what will his legacy be? What will people write about in baseball books and talk about in baseball documentaries 10, 20, 50 years from now?
Well, I think it's just this combination of both turmoil and ultimate victory that will be his legacy. It's very rare that an owner imposes himself or his shadow between the fan and the game itself. But in this case, you could not talk about the Yankees without talking about Steinbrenner, his style, his volatile temper, all of those things. And of course, he's a man with a family and had many other interests in life, but it's that sort of single-minded, determined stewardship of the Yankees that will come to mind. And it's sort of interesting that the Yankees' more recent success has been in some ways in spite of Steinbrenner. He was, of course, forbidden to be involved for a while, which permitted the Yankees, who were famous for trading away their homegrown talent and buying superstars, they permitted them to grow that homegrown crop of the Mariano Rivera and the Andy Pettitts and the Jorge Posadas, and most importantly, the Derek Jeters. And it's that nucleus that has remained intact for the last 15 years that has been the heart of the success, added to, of course, by those expensive free agents, which had always been Steinbrenner's style, that you get rid of your manager, you bring in a new guy, you hire some new gun, and you essentially, as many people in the rest of the baseball world accused him of time and time again, bought your pennant, bought your World Series. And I think it will be that free spending idea of the activist owner that will be his legacy for years and years to come.
Yeah, love or hate the Yankees, it was hard to keep your eyes or your thoughts or your opinions off of George Steinbrenner.
It's funny, though. The Yankees are the most successful franchise in all of baseball history, and so it is natural that they steal the spotlight. When we did our baseball series, both the original edition that came out in '94 and this new one that's coming up, you just know that the Yankees are always going to be there. You don't have to actually deal with them per se because they're always front and center. You focus on other things, and what that breeds in the rest of the country and the rest of the teams is sort of that hating of the Yankees. Tom Boswell, the great sports writer for the Washington Post, said 90% of all baseball fans hate the Yankees and should. But then again, you also have to have that begrudging respect for the way in which that autocratic style that seems so out of sync with what baseball's day-to-day lessons were actually delivered to Steinbrenner the continuation of that winning tradition, which is the hallmark of the pinstripe team.
Ken Burns, thank you so much for your thoughts. And Mike Taibbi, hopefully we'll hear from you some more later in the day. Again, legendary baseball owner, Yankees owner George Steinbrenner, dead at the age of 80.